who couldn't make it, and we wanted to make sure to share the recording with folks who couldn't. So welcome everyone to this panel on generative AI and statistics in data science classrooms. We're really happy that you're here. The way this is going to be working, so Donna Lalonde and myself are going to be moderating this session, but we also have 3 great panelists for you all listed on this slide here. And they're going to bring a wealth of different perspectives on our topic of generative AI in the stats and data science classroom. The way we've structured this session is that first we're going to give each of the panelists about 5 to 10 minutes to share their thoughts on the topic. And then really the second half of the session will be Q&A, and we're hoping it's a pretty interactive Q&A. So there'll be a moment for you to ask questions, but also if you have ideas on this topic, we'd love for you to share some of your solutions and some of your answers too. So before I hand it off to the panelists, I guess I'll just say that, 539 days ago, if you had asked me about my own thoughts on generative AI, I would have said, what is generative AI? And so 539 days ago is when OpenAI released ChatGPT to the public. And honestly, I think if you had asked me 500 days ago what my thoughts were on generative AI, I still probably would have said, I don't know, it's some kind of chatbot that tells me about different recipes for pad thai. But I will say that my students, I think, saw the value in ChatGPT much more quickly than I did. And really, it probably wasn't, if I'm being honest, until last summer that I thought deeply about this topic. Probably I only really think deeply during during the summer, and started to think about like, how does generative AI and these large language models impact my class, my learning objectives, right, my assessments. And so I'm not going to provide you with answers today, but our panelists will give us some thoughts. So as I said, we've got these 3 remarkable panelists who I think reacted much more quickly to generative AI than I did. And so they're going to give us some of their thoughts on the topic. If you're wondering, like, how did we pick these remarkable people? Well, actually, all 3 of them have written about their experiences or their thoughts on generative AI in stats and data science classrooms. And so we'll also share links to those papers that they've written too, to, as something to move forward and think about. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Jacob. As I said, the first part will be the panelists sharing their thoughts, and then we'll open it up for questions. But as Donna just put into the chat, feel free to also post questions in the chat. If the panelists see it while they're talking, they can address it, or we can get to it at the end. There will definitely be time. All right, with that.
And Kelly,
yeah.
You may have said this and I completely missed it while I was multitasking, but maybe we could ask the panelists to just briefly introduce themselves as well before they start jumping into generative AI. What would ChatGPT say about you?
That's true, and hopefully it wouldn't hallucinate. So yeah, that's actually a good idea. Why don't we have you all do that before you get into your slides? So let's continue to go in alphabetical order, though. So we'll start with Jacob.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Yeah, I'm Jacob Bien. I'm a professor of statistics in the Department of Data Science and Operations at the University of Southern California in the Marshall School of Business. Yes, thanks for having me, Donna and Kelly.
And then Amanda.
Hi, my name is Amanda Ellis. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky.
Hi, my name is Xingming Tu. I'm a PhD student at the University of Washington. Yeah, so I'm here to share some thoughts with my co-authors. Yeah, like more senior people. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Jacob, you have the floor.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I want to start by acknowledging that this is joint work, what I'm talking about. And my colleague, Gaurav Mukherjee, who's actually on the Zoom call, is here as well. And this is an experiment, one particular thing that we tried last fall in teaching. And so I'm excited to tell you all about it and a bit about what we learned. Okay, so I would say if you get a group of statisticians together, there's sort of a perennial dilemma about teaching introductory statistics. And the question is, how much coding, if at all, do you incorporate into your class? And this has always been something in our minds. And well, the question to teach to teach coding or not to teach coding, you could think about the different reasons why it's a good or bad idea. And on the good side, you'd say, well, if you teach students to code, that allows them to actually work directly with data, and working with data is fun and motivating, and it kind of answers naturally the question of why are we learning all these methods to analyze data? If you're curious about the data, that's it. It also helps prepare students for their future, where they'll work with data sets that maybe need some pre-processing, for example, not like textbook data. But then, on the against side, teaching coding takes a lot of time, and it can be distracting from really important statistical material, which is really what we're focused on. And what if our students become disillusioned because we're throwing too much at them all at once? So it's really relevant to think about who are the students you're teaching in the first place with this. And so let me give you some background. So Gaurav and I teach in the Marshall School of Business, and we were teaching last year in the full-time MBA program. And this is a group of 200 students with very wide-ranging backgrounds. Some have been just working in finance the year before, and others haven't taken a math class for 10 years, and they've been in the nonprofit space or something. And so we were teaching data science for business to them. And this is a required first semester core course. Okay, so everybody has to be in that class. And we teach it across 3 sections, each having about 65 students. Okay, so to code or not to code, maybe that's too much of a binary, right? There's actually a whole spectrum of options that people might consider in teaching introductory statistics. No software being at one end of the spectrum, teaching coding at the other. This is probably more than I can get into right now, but I'm happy to return to this later. But on 2 dimensions, we could think about, does it allow you to work with data? I'd say if you have no software, it's very limited what you can do with working with data. On the other hand, teaching coding, that's really the strength, I'd say, in the context of an intro stat class. You can really get students working with data flexibly. On the other hand, in terms of how easy is it to teach, it's the flip where, if you have no software, teaching is a little easier, whereas teaching software, it's hard. Okay, I'm not going to go to the rest of the dimensions, but the key point is we experimented with generative AI last semester with the idea that this could actually have the best of all the dimensions. And so let me explain a little bit more about what our approach was. So the idea is we thought, well, actually with large language models, we might be able to teach students to produce code for the sake of data analysis without actually having to spend class time talking about syntax. And how do we do it? Well, there's this large language model, GitHub Copilot, which is by OpenAI. And you can think of it as a little bit like ChatGPT, because it was specifically trained on code. They used apparently the GitHub repositories to train it. Now, primarily, it's marketed as an AI pair programmer. So for people who are already good programmers to make them more efficient. But we took sort of a slightly different use case, which is we thought of it as a way where a student could write in a comment some English describing what they want the code to be, and then the next line fills in with some code. Okay, so it's a very very functional autocomplete for code. And let me just show it in the context of our studio. And all right, there we go. So you see in gray, that's what Copilot is suggesting. So I'm starting to type, okay, load redfin.csv. And then there it is. It fills in some code for me. And now I can go back and I can run the lines of code. And I never had to think about whether it's an underscore before the CSV or anything. And now I might say, okay, well, show me the names of the variables. And it does that for me. And there we go. All right, so no class time was spent talking about what the syntax was, but a student could basically just go ahead and describe what they want and get that. Now, just because we're not talking about teaching syntax, it turns out this is something we kind of learned through the course of the semester of doing. There are some principles that you have to teach the student anyway. And so here are 3 principles. One is to be very specific. The next is thinking about the context window, which is saying, think about what Copilot has available when you're asking it to do something. What does it know? What does it not know? And then the last is actually, this is just a programming principle in general, which is this idea, which might be new to, was new to some of our students, which is the idea of if you have a complex task you want a computer to do, you still need to think about how to break it down into small, simple steps. Okay, so I can just show this brief video. So in terms of specificity being important. So here we're asking, okay, let's make a plot. This is a data set of condos. And so price versus square footage. And it generates some code, but there's an error. And the error is, it says, well, object SQFT is not found. And the problem here is that auto-generated code just guessed at what the name of the variable was. It didn't know that actually the variable was all caps written in a very particular way. So we need our prompts to be very specific. And so that's something we have to teach our students to get used to. So they actually, just because in the R console, the name of the variable is known doesn't mean that Copilot was aware of those variable names. So if we type out more specifically the names of the variables, now the code that's generated should work. And there you go. Okay. And so just to see the sort of thing you can do, then you can say, well, there's that really expensive condo there. And so you could, have some follow-up. You could say, okay, show the condo with price that's higher than, and you could just see how high that is. It's like above 3.5 million. And it can give you that code to do that. And now it's found the one observation. That's not so helpful yet. So maybe we want to say, well, what is its address? And when we do that, it gives us some code, and there we go. We have the address of some condo that apparently was on sale for more than 3.5 million. Okay, so you can see people can work very flexibly this way. But you can also see these 2 principles where, if you just refer to price in general without the specific wording, all caps, for example, it wouldn't be able to figure that out. However, once we do at some point write in all caps price, it's able to know that in context, and later on we can refer to price more flexibly. Okay, this last principle, I'm going to skip the example for now, but I'll just tell you that basically we're trying to get Copilot to do a logistic regression for us, but we first need to form the binary variable that we're going to predict. And a student who doesn't think like a computer might just try to do it all in one step, but instead we teach, no, let's start by forming a new variable that's a binary version of a previous variable. Okay, now we're going to predict that with logistic regression. Okay, so I'm skipping this now. Briefly, I think the challenges were actually quite interesting and in some cases even sort of funny. So first of all, Copilot's outputs are random. And this could be very disconcerting if you've prepared your lecture a day in advance and you're all ready to go, and you type exactly the same prompt you did the day before in front of a live classroom of students, and you get some different output. Okay, so first of all, that's disconcerting to the professor, but even for the students, this sort of happens because, we had a classroom of 65 students and 50 of them would get one output and 15 would get another. And basically, the solution to this is to make prompts very specific, because if a prompt is very specific, then there's less latitude that the Copilot has in its output. I can go into the rest of these later, but I'm almost up at my 10 minutes. So I can just say that we were very inspired. We found this very beneficial in that it did allow, motivated students could really feel like they were learning something that would be very useful and that could really extend very naturally to, even if we didn't teach every operation possible, they could kind of figure it out just by describing in English what they wanted to do. So, all right, with that, I'm going to pass it over to, and so Gaurav and I wrote up this piece in archive right now on this, and I guess the slides will be shared later. Great. So, to Amanda.
Thank you. That was really interesting. So like I said earlier, my name is Amanda Ellis. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky. Last summer, Dr. Emily and Slade and I, we both wrote a paper together about incorporating ChatGPT in the classroom. It got published in the Journal for Statistics and Data Science Education. So I think there's going to be a link shared for that later. But what I really want to talk about is kind of what I've been doing over this last year after that paper was published. And so, like many of you, the fall came and I needed to write all of my syllabi. And I should say I don't have any slides this year. I'm just going to be talking. But I needed to write my syllabus. And I really struggled with this. I'm sure, like most of you, my university had guidelines that were put forth on how to talk about generative AI in the syllabus, and there were certain recommendations. Our university took the approach of really suggesting one of three levels, whether a really restrictive policy or a less restrictive policy. And what I realized while writing my syllabi was that I didn't know what to write because I didn't know how my students were actually using generative AI. And so without knowing what my students were actually doing, I didn't know if I should restrict their behavior, encourage their behavior. I really just didn't know what they were doing. So I decided to take this last year to just see if I could explore what are students actually doing? How are they using generative AI? What tools are they using? What are the most common ones? And it ended up that I primarily focused on ChatGPT because that's what I saw students were using the most, but I did hear about other tools. So a little bit of background information before I talk about what I observed and what I talk to students about. I have a very heavy teaching load. I teach usually 6 to 7 courses, and these are 6 to 7 different courses per academic year. And most of the time I'm teaching graduate students either in our master's program, PhD program, or in our master's of public health program. So in the fall, I was teaching 3 different graduate level courses. And one of the things that I do in those courses is the students take just a weekly survey. And I did this, this wasn't just for generative AI, I've done this before. And it's really just meant to help with metacognition, where I ask the students every week, how'd you feel about the homework? Do you have any additional questions about the homework? Do you need additional examples? And this fall, I added a question to that weekly survey that was just, did you use generative AI this week? And if you did, how did you use it? And I'm very, open with my students. We have a lot of conversations about these things. And what was interesting is hardly anyone told me they were using it. So it was very rare that I would have a student on their weekly survey say, yes, I use generative AI and this is how I used it and this is the tool that I used. But when they would turn in their homework, it was painfully obvious that they were using generative AI. And so it was really frustrating because I had an open policy. Basically my policy was, I just want to know how you're using it. There's no penalty. I just want to know what you're doing. And it was very obvious that they were using generative AI, but nobody wanted to admit to it. So, so that's pretty much how the whole fall semester went. And then come November, our lecturer ended up, she left and we weren't able to get a new lecturer hired in time. And so for the spring, I picked up 2 new undergraduate courses that I hadn't taught before. And so I thought, well, I don't normally teach undergraduates, but maybe this will, be my second opportunity here. Maybe I can figure out what students are actually doing, in their coursework. How are they using generative AI? So I took a little bit of a different approach in the spring, and I just focused on one of the courses I was teaching. This was a 300 level data analysis course for our Bachelor of Public Health students. This was the second course that they take. So you can think of this as past your, one course past your standard intro course. In this course, we primarily focus on categorical data analysis since these are bachelor's in public health students. And what I decided to do was I just started off with a survey. And instead of this being like the weekly survey I described previously, this was a survey specifically on generative AI and how students are using it. And I think in some of the questions, I remember I even specifically mentioned ChatGPT, since I had already gotten the feel that was primarily what students were using. And so some of the questions I asked students were, give me 3 words that you associate with generative AI. And I also asked them things like, are you already using it? If so, what are you using? And then ask them, would you like training on this? And what I found was really interesting was I took those responses, that was the question of, give me 3 words that you associate, and I made a little word cloud. And the biggest words that I found were things like cheating, academic integrity, basically a lot of negative things. But a lot of the students were using it. And almost all, actually, it may have been all of the students said they wanted more training in it. And so what I kind of came to the conclusion of is I think a lot of the conversations we are having as educators revolve around a lot about, how students could use this to cheat and not so much the positives of it. And I think students are hearing that language. And so even though they're using it, they don't want to tell us they're using it. They don't want to tell us how they're using it because they're automatically afraid no matter what they do, we're going to say it's cheating. And so I think there's a lot of fear, even though they're really using these. And so this causes concern for me because I do think generative AI is a wonderful tool that we can use, but we need to make sure that we use it ethically. We need to think about how it's being used. We need to use it as a tool, not as a replacement. And so what I decided to do for the remainder of the semester was I wanted to model good behavior for the students in how ChatGPT specifically could be used as a tool to help them with research, but to also have conversations with the students about, bad and good ways to use it. And so I started off by just sharing some of the results from that survey with them. And, it talked about, some of their perceptions. And then what they did over the course of that semester was they worked on a project that at the very end of the project, they analyzed some real data and they made a research poster. But I broke down the steps of creating that research poster for them into several different assignments to lead up to that research poster. And in each of the steps, we talked about, well, how could ChatGPT or generative AI be useful? And we talked about some ways that it would be good to use it and ways that would be bad to use it. So for example, many of these students had never made a research poster before. So step one was just, let's learn about what a research poster is. And so we used ChatGPT just to learn about, well, what are the components of a research poster? What do these look like? And then we talked as a class about, what are some pros and some cons to using ChatGPT to learn about this specific writing style. And then we talked about, in the future, when they get to their jobs, they'll probably be asked to write, in certain styles that they've never written before. And so we talked about how you could use ChatGPT to learn about those different writing styles or, different types of writing or different article types or just anything of that nature so that they could use ChatGPT to learn about that to kind of get a baseline. But we also talked about ways that it didn't work well. Research posters are visual. ChatGPT didn't help with that. And so we talked about that first. And then, different assignments build up different pieces. So another one looked at literature reviews, for example. And so we looked at finding literature for the background for their poster. And one of the things they found was that it hallucinated references. But we talked about, how sometimes it gives you good ones, sometimes it gives you bad ones. And then that led us to this very natural conversation about, well, how do you go about finding good references? How can you use one reference to then find other references? And so we really used it and talked about ways that it could be a tool, again, not just replacing. We would look at writing styles and talk about how, well, if we just ask ChatGPT to write this, it doesn't do a very good job. But if I ask ChatGPT to assess the tone of my writing, or to maybe make suggestions between conversational tone and academic writing, it can help make those kinds of suggestions. So again, really focusing on how we can use ChatGPT as a tool and talking about that with the students and really having those conversations. So that's what I did this spring. I felt like by the end, it worked out really well. I think the students really appreciated it. I think they liked that hands-on feeling, not just feeling like they were given an assignment, but that they actually got to dig in, they got to break it down in pieces, to see the different parts of it. And so I feel like it went really well. So that was my spring. I'll stop talking now and pass it on, but I'm really excited about this topic.
Hi everyone, I'm Xingming to I'm here to share some thoughts, like brief thoughts from our previous perspective paper to discuss what should data science education do with large language model. So actually, we can divide this into two parts. First is what to teach, and the second is how to teach. And we believe actually the large language model can have like large impact in both direction. So first is about what to teach. So before that, we should know like what's the impact of the large language model for the data science? So actually now they can do like simplify the complex task by just a simple human natural language input. So they will transfer the data science pipeline very easily. So they can actually do this all tasks like clean data, exploration, the data, and even propose some question and build a model and also write some reports. So in our paper, we actually try like a new data set, which is the ChatGPT, the previous version of the ChatGPT, never seen, and then ask the ChatGPT to do with some very simple like natural language input. So the left column would be the prompt input. That's exactly the input we ask the ChatGPT to do. We just upload the data and ask the ChatGPT do some data cleaning. So they can actually run some code. So because the ChatGPT can have some interaction with the Python code interpreter, so they actually can produce some code and run it by itself. So they can actually checking for the missing value, remove the duplication row, and checking the inconsistent or invalid value, and also convert the category column to numerical representation. And also they can do data cleaning and build model. And also if we ask the model to like, okay, ask the ChatGPT to improve the model, like, oh, maybe you can try different model. They can also try random forest, support SVM, gradient boosting, and also they can report some accuracy for this different model. And all this is done by just a simple input, just as the first column, very simple text input. So that would be like have a large impact to what to teach in the data science. And the second would be, okay, we can also evaluate the ChatGPT on some statistical thinking. Like, okay, we have some hypothesis, we have some exercise, and how the ChatGPT can do. So we actually find a quite not well-known textbook and convert all exercise like around 120 exercise into LaTeX description. And then we just copy the LaTeX into the ChatGPT and ask the ChatGPT to answer the question. And surprisingly, actually, the ChatGPT can do really well. Like in more than 100 exercise, they answer correctly, and they're like have 8 exercises they do made some mistake, and there are 4 exercises they cannot get like a great output because this exercise requires some figure as input. But I believe now the ChatGPT can see the figure now, like it's different from the last year's version. So probably the ChatGPT can already solve this for questions. So all this like results imply us, okay, we like the content to teach the language model would be like have to be changed. And there have some more example in our paper. And the next is impact on how to teach. And I think we believe there are 2 parts. First is for the teacher part. Actually, teacher can also use the ChatGPT for teach. And the second is the student part. Student can use the ChatGPT or large language model for tutoring to ask questions. So first is actually it's really it's quite challenging for all teacher to know the up-to-date progress in like in industry, especially in data science, like the new package, how to use that. Actually, it's quite challenging to catch up the every updates in here. But with the help of the large language model, we can like teacher can easily do that. They can just simply ask the ChatGPT what's the reasons or what's the best used in the recent years for this, and can design some teach material and even generate some quiz. We have some example in the perspective paper. And the second is for the students. Actually, there is a previous like 40 years ago, there is a paper discuss one-to-one tutoring can improve the student performance by 2 sigma in the distribution, which is like really large improvement. So, but due to the resource, like the limitation, actually before the large language model, it's almost impossible, or it's just some inequality in the education. But now with the AI or the ChatGPT, student can have a personalized tutoring. Just ask a question, like to provide the education experience and support for every different students, because we believe different students will have different question, and the way to how teach them would be like very different. So that's some like impact on how to teach. And the final is some thoughts on the future, like if in long term, what would be the future would be like. So we believe it's probably like more collaborative future. It's not human replaced by the AI. It's more about collaborator. So first, even like in the like for example in the professional Go player, the player will use AI to training, like to improve themselves. And we believe even in the data science or in any in more general domain, it's probably also possible to do that. We can even improve ourselves with the help of the AI technology, and also combining the AI and the human intelligence, because we believe actually they have different strengths. Like the generative AI made a lot of mistake in sometimes, but human actually generative answer is more challenge for human. But discriminator, like which answer is correct, human actually are good at that. So we can like actually combine that, like complementary each other to have this like the future collaborative data science data science. So yeah, and I haven't covered is what's the limitation of the AI. I actually in currently generative AI, they have several limitations, like they have some bias, they are have the due to the limitation of the auto regression, they cannot like have some draft and a thinking, so they will made some very naive mistake. So students should need to know how to handle this limitation with the generative AI. And yeah, and by this help, they can learn the data science like easily and much like yeah, much easy to learn this. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's all. So I stop sharing.
All right, so now we'll turn it over for Q&A, and I know Donna's probably been collecting because it looks like we have some questions already, right, Donna?
We do. I'm going to start with one that was actually came in very early in the Q&A, and it's a broad question, but I think an interesting one. And from your experiences, how what would you consider effective? So reflecting back, Amanda, you did some of this in your presentation, but maybe start with you, and we can go around to consider what's effective by integrating AI in teaching and learning.
Yeah, for me, it's, have I been able to integrate AI in a way that supports the students' learning, but doesn't replace their output, if that makes sense. So truly that it's used as a learning tool, but not as a way that they're just producing output and not thinking about what that means. Hopefully that makes sense what I mean there. But that's what I think of a way to effectively integrate AI, is really thinking about it as a tool, and being very thoughtful and thinking about how it's supporting their learning and helping to further their learning.
Jacob, yeah.
Yeah. Are thinking about this, like just because the technology exists doesn't mean we need to use it, right? But I felt like in this case, we had this dilemma already, which is, when you're teaching introduction to statistics to students who are going to find that very challenging and maybe don't want to delve into, they don't want to become professional statisticians or data scientists. There's just sort of this dilemma. And so I felt that, using GitHub Copilot or maybe similar tools was a really effective way at getting at that sort of intersection, that intersection between, giving students things that will show them the potential of data science, and yet at the same time, not making them sit down and learn a whole language. There were some other benefits that I thought were really nice. Another one is that we could, I think, teaching syntax, if you're going to spend time teaching syntax, you really have to believe in the language that you're teaching the students, that it's going to, that language rather than a different language is really what will be best for them. And a really nice thing about these tools is they kind of abstract away the layer of the choice of what specific language you're in. And I think that's a really great thing that I couldn't have imagined it, sort of like Kelly said at the start, before ChatGPT, I wouldn't have been able to imagine a world where we could not decide on a language and yet be able to teach students basically the ideas of coding.
A good follow-up question, I'm just going to hop in on that, was asked by Larry Lesser of like, okay, so if we're not teaching syntax anymore, like, does that mean, so Larry's asking, should departments drop their statistical programming course or replace it with something else?
Can I jump in on that one real quick? Because I think Jacob made a really good point. It's, you have to think about who your audience is and what the learning outcomes are for that particular audience. And for a question like that, I think it really depends on who are the audience of the statistical programming course. If they are an audience that are going to become programmers, that are going to be, if they're going to be the ones that are going to go out there and work as master's level biostatisticians or statisticians, then I think that course is really important. But if they're Jacob students in that particular course, it may not be as important. So I think thinking about who your students are and their student learning outcomes is really an important piece.
So in
and one other
no,
thing,
please.
like I think a statistical computing course teaches far more than syntax is the other thing. So there's certainly a lot to be learned that is not replaced by this. And also to Amanda's point, I'm not convinced I would teach this way for students who are, exactly as Amanda said, students who are wanting a more specialized career in this area. And actually, to quote from Amanda's piece that you all cited, they compare to the use of the calculator, right? And we still teach arithmetic even though there are calculators.
Yeah, actually, there is a more extreme viewpoint from the computer science community. There is a perspective paper called "The End of Programming." Like that means the classical programming probably at the end of, like, for example, the 10 years, and then there would be like more natural language programs. So yeah, I'm not sure like what the future will be for the programming. Yeah.
Jacob, maybe I'll come back to you for a couple of questions that were in the chat that you've, I think, touched on. But one of the questions is around the main concern is that if a student doesn't understand R well enough to know when they are getting incorrect code, then they'll end up doing the wrong analysis, but thinking they're asking R to do the right thing. So wonder if you might respond to that, and others feel free to jump in with your experiences as well.
Yeah, I think that is a concern, but I think it all boils down to how you teach with this tool, right? And the rules of teaching with this tool are different from the rules we're used to. And in particular, what I would encourage students to do a lot, which is actually not that different from what we did before, is you break things down into small little pieces, and then you examine the output of of the small little piece you tried, and you do sort of check work. You see, well, does that make sense? I've just made a plot with these two variables. Is it weird that the y-axis extends to 10 million? And so you try to sort of have a feedback loop built into the student's head where they're constantly going back in these small pieces and examining the output. The thing here is this is for the situation where you're, using coding for data analysis, where, you can always sort of come up with these checks to try to make sure you're doing the right thing. So that's, I guess, what comes to mind there.
Anyone else
I
want
think-
to weigh in? Yeah, Ximing.
I think another interesting part is actually the mistake of the generative AI can be the assignment for students to know, because we usually use some peer review assignments in here, but now we have the generative AI, we can even generate a lot. Just we are not asking students to produce the answer. We are asking them to review, okay, if there any mistake in their answer, so that can help the student don't trust it, don't totally trust the AI. They have the critical thinking to more careful about the output of the model. Yeah.
There's wow, there's so many great questions in the chat and in the Q&A, but Amanda, maybe to start with you, based on your experience, do you think that the risk that ChatGPT or similar tools negatively affect students' learning can be counteracted if we embrace explicitly teaching students how to use these tools appropriately?
I think we have to teach them how to use them appropriately. I think they're going to use them no matter what. And so I think if we don't teach them how to use them appropriately, and I'll come back to that. I think we have to, as I stop. Well, sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied. I think we have to teach them how to use it. And in part because they're going to be using it when they get on the job site. They're going to be using it in our classrooms, whether we want them to or not. So if we can have thoughtful conversations with them about how to use it, I think the other really important thing to recognize is our students that we have today, they're going to be some of the ones that are deciding the ethics of how to use these things as they develop and as they grow. When we think about where our students are going to be 10 years from now, they're going to be the ones making these decisions. So if we can go ahead and talk to them about these tools now in the classroom, share our experiences with them and how we think to ethically use them, I think it's going to make them much better prepared for in the future. And of course, there's always going to be negative sides to this. If the students get really good at using them, maybe I won't be able to, tell when they are using them if they don't tell me. But for me, at least, that's a risk I'm willing to take because I do think it's so important that they learn how to use these tools.
There's a interesting question in the Q&A, I think. Well, they're all interesting, but this is interesting from the perspective of, rather than the student perspective, the sort of colleagues and administrative perspective. Do you feel supported? Any pushback? What experiences do y'all have there?
I felt supported. I think people, I think everyone in the world is trying to figure out what AI is going to mean to them. And so my personal experience was everyone was encouraging definitely we viewed this as an experiment, trying something out of our comfort zones. And yeah, I think that's sort of the situation we're in with these tools. It's also hard because these tools are changing really rapidly. So, what I learned in fall 2023 is probably going to be different in fall 2024. But, we do the best we can.
This one is a little bit in the weeds, and there's been a lot of helpful comments in the chat about how to sort of access Copilot and making sure that the students have access via the student pricing. But there was a question about integrating with Python, and Google Colab. So any experiences there that you all could share?
Yeah, I could just say, I mean, when we started at the start of the semester, we had all of our students using VS Code with Copilot, and we did not use RStudio because RStudio did not yet have Copilot integrated. And in the middle of the semester, it changed, and so then we switched over. My personal experience was getting students up and running with RStudio was easier. Actually, the burden of getting them started was on Gora because he was teaching the first half of the semester. Yeah, I mean, there are a number of steps, right? One has to sign up with GitHub and get this special academic version where students and professors don't have to pay. And then if it's VS Code, there's extensions for it. Actually, the RStudio setup was very straightforward, I thought. But that could be different next year. It could be that it just comes automatically and everything.
Donna, you're muted.
Yep, and to be really good if I unmute because you would then hear the question. But the question is, could you imagine teaching this way, the way you did in a fully asynchronous course?
So well, I think this is probably directed at Jacob, but I will say this is something I've been trying to think of. So I teach an introduction to R programming course, and I've been trying to think of ways to incorporate either Copilot, ChatGPT, something in my R programming course, and it is online asynchronous. And it's tough. It is tough, I think, to do that in the online asynchronous environment. And I'm still trying to figure it out this summer. So if anybody's done that, I want to hear.
Either. Okay, so this one is a bit of again a sort of a perspective. Do you have a sense of how potential employers, the job market feels about incorporating LLMs into data science education? Do you think they would be happy to hire students with using these experience with these tools, or hesitant to rely on hires who may not be able to build statistical reports independently? And that's kind of tied into a couple of other questions around the notion of of the fact checking, right? Making sure that you assess that the students are able to do that fact checking. So open it up for comments in that space.
I can't really speak specifically to this. I've heard anecdotally that this is a skill, this is viewed as its own skill that some employers are interested in. I think it depends completely on what sort of position is being hired for. I think, yeah, if I were an employer, I'd probably want to make sure that the people I was hiring were able to effectively accomplish the tasks that I needed them to accomplish. And whether if they were relying on AI, but knew how to use it in a way where their outputs were reliable and of high quality, I'd be happy with that.
I think recently there are already some company they are hire prompt engineer, like just how to ask the the generative AI wisely. So I think in the future it's definitely have like a required skill set, like how to collaborate with the AI tools.
I'll just point out, Laura in the chat actually said exactly what I was going to say. One of the things is, as as your advisory boards change, I think this is a great thing to think about as you're selecting advisory boards, is to have people that can speak to that.
There's a question in the Q&A about experiences teaching about data privacy and generative AI in class, and wondering if there are any resources or any thoughts to share around the data privacy.
Not really. I've read the OpenAI privacy policy, but I can't recall the details of it to say right here, right now.
I think I've captured most of the questions that are in chat, but I just want to encourage, there's been a lot of active chat, so definitely want to ask people if I've missed something to repost.
I see one question, Donna, that
Go for it.
I'd be happy to ask. So, you know, I know Amanda's telling us that we should embrace or think about embracing and not being negative to ChatGPT, but I feel what Joel is saying in his question about, so he said that, you know, he put all of his quiz questions into ChatGPT and ChatGPT got them all right. And it was using the famous Iris data set. So, you know, changing to a different data set, maybe it's not going to get it completely right. So the question is about like tips or tricks to make your assessments more robust or, you know, not as answerable by ChatGPT. And maybe I'll throw a spin on that of like, is this something we should even be trying to do? Like, or is you know, is generative AI always going to be one step ahead of us in terms of this?
So I should say, you know, for things like that, I want my students to be able to do that, not just use ChatGPT. So even though I want to fully embrace it, I still want them to be able to do things independently. And Joel, I struggle with this as well, you know, trying to think of ways that I can ask questions. I teach a math stat course, and the answers it gives for some of my homework questions, even for that course, are really good. So it's a real struggle trying to figure out, you know, that balance between how do we teach them to use it as a tool, but also teach them not to just go use this to get all the answers. And I don't know that I have a really good answer for this because it is good. You know, I would have said, you know, for quick things, you know, let's say you were going to give an exam or it's something that was like in an asynchronous online where they could still use internet notes, but you didn't want to use ChatGPT. Previously, I would have said use images of the questions instead of typing the questions so they can't copy and paste it. But it sounds like, you know, ChatGPT is getting better with images. So that might not even be a good, you know, strategy anymore. So I think we're going to have to just keep on being creative, recognizing it's going to catch up with us, and also recognizing we're never going to catch everything. Just with any type of academic integrity, we're never going to catch all of it.
I think probably a useful strategy is not use like the common things in the real world. For example, like have some example in the counterfactual world, like the physical law is different from the real world. So actually, ChatGPT will just made some silly mistake in that part. So which could be like a strategy, but it's really challenging to do that. Maybe like in the next update, the ChatGPT improved and it fixed. So yeah.
Kelly made a reference to the iris data, and that just reminded me, another sort of amusing challenge we've encountered is, yeah, if you use data sets that are famous, like we were using the wine data set that's in the UCI data bank, which tons of machine learning papers use. You start typing, you say, okay, load, wine.csv, and then Copilot just starts suggesting, let's now predict the quality of a wine based on its chemical properties. And that's definitely a teachable moment for students because it looks like it's, wow, it knew the analysis task and we didn't even, how did it know that? It didn't even know the data in it. And so definitely realizing that, yeah, if you're going to be writing an exam based on a data set, that goes, to Jinming's point about counterfactual worlds, or maybe data sets that aren't, ones where there are thousands of examples of people having analyzed it in exactly the same way online already.
And there was a related question to this about should we be more or less likely to give in-class exams instead of take-home exams? And I just can't help but answer that I'm a big proponent of oral exams. And so oral exams aren't great for coding. So I'm not saying it's coding, but I mean, we've been talking a lot about coding, but ChatGPT is also really great at giving conceptual answers. But oral exams is a great way to get your students to have a conversation with you about statistics where, you're seeing their statistical thinking, you know, in the moment. So I'm throwing into the chat now a link to Alison Theobald's paper on giving oral exams, and I guess I just highly recommend it. Small classes, big classes. I teach a class of 250 intro stats and data science students, and we give short oral exams in conjunction with an in-class exam. So a good way that maybe won't be robust forever to things like ChatGPT. We did eventually have to require it that students couldn't type during our oral exams, because we found that that was a way that they could still try to use these tools, but just a thing to think about as we're adapting our assessments.
So my thinking, actually what we did for our final is we had two parts to the exam. So the first part of it was open computer, open Copilot. So they were allowed to have Copilot open in our studio, and that was it. And there we were testing their ability to do the things we were teaching them in code. But then when they finished that, we gave them a paper, a traditional pen and paper exam where it was closed all technology. And there, that was testing more the conceptual thinking.
I typed this in the Q&A. I'm moving to do more in-person exams as well, and doing kind of a hybrid approach where part of, you know, there's an in-person piece that's on paper, and then, you know, another piece as well.
Donna, we maybe have time for one more question. Do you have any other questions from the audience?
Well, there is a question about sharing resources. So I guess maybe I'll answer that question by saying if folks want to share them with me, I'll make sure that we collect them. And I know there was an issue with the link with one of the pages on the our resource page, but I think I've corrected that, but we'll do that just immediately after the webinar if not. So
Also looks like Nabil has their hand up.
oh, okay. Well, let's see if we can do something about that. All right,
Can you hear me?
we can.
Oh, just a quick suggestion from my experience with ChatGPT. I use in my class a smart short quiz of 1 minute without context, so ChatGPT cannot answer. Like, what is the summary or the subject of this chapter of this paper without mentioning the paper name at all. So ChatGPT have hard time to know which paper you're talking about. And also 1 minute, so the student cannot, you know, copy and paste and try to find the answer. And the other method I use too is to let the student do some oral presentation, very short in the class as a group of 3 students to cover the 60 students in my class. So I find these two techniques very helpful, even though with ChatGPT. And I do them frequently, like I have a quiz every class. But of course, I don't have fine and other stuff. So this is just my personal experience. Thank you.
So Kelly, I think I'm going to read the one of the comments that is a great way to end. This has been great, and that actually has been expressed a lot. My takeaway is to think about ways to incorporate AI to model ethical use and support my students to do more advanced work. Thank you. And so I think that's a great, that there's been a lot of really, to our panelists, just amazing presentations and much appreciation for your taking the time.
Yeah, wonderful. So yes, thanks again to our panelists. And as Donna said, we'll share resources. So we'll share the recording and also the links to the resources. Is you signed up for the webinar. So when we send it out, we'll send it out to the email address you signed up with. So thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks again, everyone. Bye.